Support for Steppin Out comes in part from the Kristovich family in honor of Mary Lou and Bill Kristovich. This program is sponsored in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support the arts and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Good evening, I'm Peggy Scott Laborde, and welcome to Steppin Out, spotlighting the New Orleans area's arts and entertainment scene. Seated at our table tonight, Poppy Tucker, host of the radio program Louisiana Eats, airing twice weekly on WWNO Radio. Great to see you, dear.
Hi, Peg.
Happy New Year. Hello. And it's so nice to see John Kemp, art columnist for Louisiana Life Magazine, here to tell us about the Inventing Acadia exhibit at the New Orleans Museum of Art. And John will also have a remembrance of the late artist Rolland Golden. Good to see you. Hello. Hi. And Alan Smason of Crescent City Jewish News and theatercriticism.com. Did you have a happy Hanukkah?
I did, and you, I hope, had a great New Year's and Merry Christmas.
You betcha. You betcha. Anyway, let's start off with Miss Poppy.
Well, you know, those holidays are over, but we live in New Orleans, so it's just time for it to start all over again. And our friend Will Samuels, who is sort of the great entrepreneur of the king cake world, is getting rolling on Monday, Feast of the Epiphany, January 6th, at the King Cake Hub. The hub is back. Only in New Orleans do you find a former mortuary, a funeral home that is now selling king cakes every day, starting Monday morning at 8 a.m. There's a huge, fabulous event. We've got a picture from last year with Benny Grunch and the Bunch and the Panorama Brass Band. Now, what Will has there in the portico, that side entrance of the mausoleum, is over a dozen bakeries that he's carrying with 50 different king cakes to choose from. Last year's exclusive Epiphany cake from Gambino's is back again, and new that he's very excited this year from Collude is a dragon claw. That is, let's say, Dong Fong-like. It's the Collude is, because, you know, that's how it all started for
it's
Will
hard to get them.
at Pizza Nola with the Dong Fong king cake. So now, then there's 6 from Gambino's. There's 10 coming from Collude altogether. High Dough has 4, including chocolate cream cheese. Canada's in Homa. Now, this is a perfect example of why the King Cake Hub makes such sense, because it's really hard to go to Homa for king cake.
You think?
Well, they're coming to Will every day, and that's going to include the gooey butter snickerdoodle king cake, the cannoli king cake, and a Who-Dat king cake.
Right.
Who-Dat. Now, there's going to be 3 from Bywater Bakery, but also on Monday, it's good to know that Bywater Bakery is hosting an all-day block party at their bakery on Charter Street off of St. Claude. Then there are 8 different vegan versions this year from Girls Gone Vegan. Noka's Satsuma Almond French Style King Cake is back this year. Sugar Love's King Cake on a Stick and Bread Pudding King Cake will be there, along with things from District Donuts, Zapardo's, and Mayhew Bakery. And then new this year, I mean, Will's just turning this into a happening. There's going to be Lunch and Learn on Tuesdays, starting next Tuesday on the 7th, and I'll be there on the 21st, and Peggy's there on February 4th. And the King Cake Hub is there to service you with 50 different king cakes from this Monday all the way through Lundi Gras, 7 days a week, 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. No matter the weather, Will be there.
And then, of course, that's at the end of right by the cemetery.
Yeah, it's a great, they ride the streetcar, to the King Cake Hub. And then we want to congratulate Broussard's, who is celebrating this year their centennial. They're celebrating with special menus that are highlighting ingredients integral to New Orleans culinary history: coffee, spices, rice, pecans, and citrus will all be featured throughout the year, starting off with coffee. And so there's a 3-course menu for $38 that will begin with duck and pimento Johnny cakes with chicory coffee and duck liver mousse. Ooh. The entree is a coffee-crusted lamb loin chasseur with lyonnaise potatoes and roasted carrots. And for dessert, spiked coffee cake with cafe brulo ganache. I want some of that. So happy 2020. There's lots of celebrations to look for, including Antoine's 180th.
All right.
That's coming this year, too. And then if you're not ready to let go of the holidays, the Ruby Slipper Cafe is still offering their holiday brunch menu through February 4th at all locations. The menu includes things like red-eye ham Benedict, but this kills me, French toast stuffed with roasted sweet potato cheesecake filling, topped with salted caramel sauce and spiced pecans. And let's just wash that down with a hot bananas Foster cocktail. Let's just do that. And, I just really wanted to bring up the Ruby Slipper because the WYES are the most fantastic people. They are so generous. The darn Hard Rock Hotel puts them out of business on Canal Street. What do? They go out in the street and feed everybody for free. Remember last year when we had that horrible federal strike and they were feeding every day? Any of those federal employees got a free meal at the Ruby Slipper Cafe. So New Orleans needs to go check out their holiday brunch menu and support the Ruby Slipper Cafe. They are so philanthropic.
Thank you, Poppy. And turning to John, New Orleans Museum of Art continues to surprise.
Well, after having king cake with Poppy and lunch at the Bracelet, stop by the New Orleans Museum of Art. They have an important show there. It's called, as you mentioned earlier, Inventing Acadia, Painting in Place in Louisiana. Now, this is a show in the making for many years now. And what it does, and this hasn't been done, I guess, in 40 years in New Orleans at the museum, it explores the evolution of landscape painting in Louisiana in the late 19th century, beginning with the Civil War up until about 1900. And Katie Fole, the curator of the museum, did an excellent job in pulling together 60 paintings from around the country, including local collections, that shows how New Orleans in the late 19th century became sort of I won't use the word Mecca, but sort of a spot for artists from the northeastern states and from France and from the Caribbean and Mexico converged upon Louisiana to explore this sort of romantic landscape we had, the swamp and the bayous that unlike you'd find in other parts of the country, and slowly evolved a whole new school of landscape painting called, the Bayou School. And she also shows in the paintings that how even the landscapes in Louisiana slowly evolved from the Richard Clegg paintings of say right after the Civil War was the Barbizon school of realism. We actually painting like Clegg painted what he saw, to other painters towards the end of the century like Joseph Meekling, who sort of loved the light and the mist that you found in the bayou and found these really romantic scenes of the bayou and swamp. So you go from the realism to the romantic in that period. So she does a great job in pulling this all together. But most importantly, what she does, and the curator, is to show how landscape painting really fits in with the total history of American art in the 19th century. For the most part, 19th century art historians have really, outside of this area, have ignored Louisiana painting. But this shows that the artists that were coming and working in New Orleans and training local artists are the same ones who were showing in Paris, also showing in Boston and New York. These were first-rate paintings that were coming to explore this landscape in Louisiana. And what sets the whole stage, the undercurrent for the whole thing, which is kind of interesting actually, hence the name Inventing Acadia, is Longfellow's poem Evangeline, published in the 1840s, where if you read the poem, you see this romantic notion he creates of the swamps of Louisiana, where, Evangeline and the boat going through the bayous. And of course, this is one of the most popular poems of the 19th century in America. So you had artists who were intrigued by this and coming to Louisiana to explore that. So it did a great job in putting this all together.
So John, there was clearly a market for it. People liked having landscapes.
Well, it was really interesting because, that prior to the Civil War, the portrait photography was the main thing. And then when cameras came into being, they got away from portrait painting, for the most part, to take photographs. That's a new medium, photographs. And landscape painting really became much more of interest to art collectors. And the same thing was going on from the Northeast with the Hudson River School, exploring the wilderness of America and painting the wilderness, showing how the wild America is being destroyed by the oncoming Industrial Revolution. And so they wanted to capture that moment. But in Louisiana, it was just the opposite. We didn't have industrialism of any sort. It was the romance and the beauty of the landscape itself and how it was being exploited by farmers and by plantations and everything, and how all that fit into the natural course of the land in Louisiana. So it was a whole school of itself that emerged out of that period that was just very definitely Louisiana, brought on not just by local painters, who were very few at that point, but those who came from other places to New Orleans to create that new Louisiana landscape painting.
All right.
And out of that exhibit came this really terrific scholarly catalog called Inventing Acadia. It's very scholarly, so but it really sets this tone really well and does a great job in setting this Louisiana art in that historical perspective.
All right. Thank you so much, Don. We'll see you in just a bit.
Yes, please.
And New Orleans Magazine's quiz queen, Julia Street, has a question for us. Last time, we asked for the names of two celebrated local quarterbacks who both wear the same number and what that number is. The answer is the Saints' Drew Brees and LSU's Joe Burrow, who both wear number 9. Now, tonight's question. To get to the 2010 Super Bowl, the Saints had to beat 2 teams in the playoffs. Who were they? Email your answers to steppinout@wyes.org. Our prizes, a year subscription to Louisiana Life Magazine. And tonight we have a dish towel with the message beer, bourbon, and beignets from our friends at wearablevegetables.com. We also have a pair of complimentary French Quarter walking tour tickets courtesy of the Friends of the Cabildo. Go to friendsofthecabildo.org for more info on those tours. You can also go to wyes.org/steppinout for our online calendar, including a preview screening of the first episode of Masterpiece Theater's Sanditon. And that, in case it sounds familiar, well, let me tell you about that. The preview screening is this Wednesday, January 8th. It's at our station, 916 Navarre. And there will be a champagne reception at 6:30, and the screening begins at 7:30. Tickets are $20 per person, helping the station. Go to wyes.org/events. There's a lot of slashing going on to purchase Sanditon tickets. Now, by the way, that's based on Jane Austen's unfinished novel. You can also link to WYES's YouTube channel to see our program. And now, Alan.
So is the series finished? I'm just wondering.
Yes, the series, yes, they do. Yes, the series is finished.
So,
good question.
Happy New Year to everybody. I hope everybody is having a good time as we advance into January. We've just taken the wraps off another new year, and already the announcements are fast and furious about what local productions there are, what openings there are. As you know, many of our locals appreciate, we're in between seasons, between the holiday season and the carnival season. So right now is that sweet spot between the holidays and, that whole thing kicks off on Monday, and we know the Funny 40 Fellows. The first offering that'll be of interest is The Uninvited. This is a production from Goat in the Road Productions, the people who brought you The Stranger Disease a few years ago. Oh, yeah. It was an award-winning production. They've had several things like that they've done where they do historical research and they have an ensemble piece where they all sort of actors in the company work together and they do the dialogue together, etc. This time it's based on a historical incident that actually occurred back in 1874. The setting is, for those of you who understand it, James Gallier, the architect, has passed on about 6 years. His wife and family are getting ready to gather for an evening dinner, and when the meal is interrupted by a mob of people who want to re-segregate the integrated school next door. And so there's a lot of interest here about class and race, and it's all lovingly presented by people at the Gallier House in cooperation with Goat in the Road Productions. That'll be on Royal Street for the next 6 weeks, starting next Friday. It begins on Friday, but it'll be on succeeding Thursdays as well, all the way through February the 14th, Valentine's Day. Meanwhile, Lionel Bart, as we all know, came up with one of the best shows ever on Broadway and the West End as well. That was Oliver. And Rivertown Theaters for the Performing Arts is bringing that back in a really big way. It'll be starring Arthur Resnick in the title role, if you will, of Oliver. But it'll also have Gary Rucker. He's slated to play Fagin, and his fellow co-artistic director of Kelly Fushi will be playing Nancy. And, of course, those of you who remember Sean Richmond, who's been in several productions and in films, you may remember him in Kingdom of the Earth that Tennessee Williams Theater Company had done in their initial production. He's going to be a proper menacing Bill. It should be really wonderful. And Liam Gillen will be the Artful Dodger. That'll be Oliver starting January the 10th, next weekend, at the Rivertown Theaters for the Performing Arts out in Kenner. Meanwhile, the play's the thing wherein we'll catch the conscience of the king. The New Orleans Shakespeare Festival will try to deal with all of that as we talk about the Dark Dane, the Prince Hamlet, if you will. It'll be starting up at Dixon Hall next Friday night. That'll be January the 10th. And again, intervening days, check your calendar for that as well at neworleansshakespeare.org. And then the other production that's coming up is the NOLA Project. We've all been looking at some of the wonderful things they do through the years, of course, for now 14 years. They're returning indoors because they do a lot of things outdoors at City Park. Their first production for 2020 will be Harry and the Thief. Now, this involves time travel and Harriet Tubman. And I'm not going to say much more about that. It's a very original piece, and they'll probably be very interesting. Give us something to think about. That'll be playing at the Contemporary Art Center because, as you know, the NOLA Project does not have a brick-and-mortar location, so they go from place to place, and they will be at the Contemporary Art Center starting on Thursday, January the 16th. Keep that in mind. Now, one other thing to bring up. For the past couple of years, Spencer Rocca, who won the BB Stage Door Canteen Stage Door Idol competition a few years ago, he's been channeling Frank Sinatra. And those of you who've seen the show know how really wonderful he is in that. Well, many people do not know that he first started work as, I guess, an Elvis homage artist. I don't want to call him an impersonator, but he really is going to be doing his Elvis show, starting up The King on January the 22nd on Wednesdays, all the way from starting in January through June. So you have plenty of times to see this, but if Spencer is to, be believed as a great performer for Frank Sinatra, you can't wait to see what he's going to do with Elvis and the King. And, of course, Elvis's birthday is coming up on January the 8th of this next week, so I think it's appropriate that we kind of remember him now. So there you go.
Okay. Thank you so much, Al. And turning to John, and a dear friend, but an internationally known artist, Rolland Golden.
Yeah,
Remembering
Rolland.
him.
Yeah, I'm sure you all know Rolland Golden. Born in New Orleans in 1931, but he was really a remarkable and prolific artist who had a great love for New Orleans and the southern landscape, especially in the Delta, the Mississippi Delta. Spent days and weeks just in his car traveling around the countryside, gathering images for his paintings. And he found art in this sort of ordinary things, and art and beauty, in a highway sign on in a southern highway, a weed in a ditch, or a crumbling sharecropper shack in the Mississippi Delta, or on a winding road, on the ships in the harbor of New Orleans. He was pretty remarkable in capturing. In fact, he was one of the first artists I ever wrote about, and he taught me a great lesson and how to see the world around me, as artists should be able to do. But he was one of the few that really does that by seeing sort of everything you did, you captured in as a painting, a Rolland Golden painting. But when he got angry about issues, he also expressed that through his art, like the demolition of the historic buildings in the Central Business District, a whole series of paintings in the demolition series, or Vietnam, the Vietnam War. He did it indirectly through his Civil War series, where you'll see a statue with blood dripping down the arm of the soldier rather than some bucolic battlefield scene. And then there was Katrina. He told me in an interview we did for the show at NOMA that he had planned to retire. He was sort of said everything he wanted to say until Katrina came along. Then he did this magnificent series of paintings that he considered probably the best of his career. And he did that, and so and finally, through that, he gained the recognition he long deserved. We've been collectors all over the country, had shows in Russia. One of his paintings hangs in the Pushkin Museum. But in New Orleans, he was just Rolland, an artist here with his many, many collections. But then NOMA had a one artist show for him for his Katrina series, then the Historic New Orleans Collection, then the Ogden Museum, then the Museum of the Mississippi Museum of Art in Jackson, Mississippi, the museums in Georgia. So he finally got that recognition he so richly deserved. And it made him happy in those sort of final years that he was finally recognized for that. And of course, there are also a number of books that either he wrote or were included in. The first book was called The World of Rolland Golden. You see this here by Don Lee Keith, our old friend Don Lee Keith. And Don, in the text, in the introductory essay, described Rolland's paintings as sort of an evasive melody, which was, I thought, was a very nice way to describe some of his paintings, especially his rural landscapes. Rolland also described his work as sort of abstract realism, because he had a lot of abstract images in his realism. And of course, there was Along the Banquet. This is that Vieux Carré series that Edith Long did for the newspaper. And in 2004, they put them together in a book, Edith Long's columns and then Rolland's drawings of French Quarter scenes. And then the biography I wrote of Rolland in 2005. And we had the wonderful luck of coming out in October 2005, a month just after Katrina, when there was nobody in New Orleans. But that was one. And I really enjoyed doing it because we sat for days and days talking about his work and his life and so forth. And then I also wrote the text for the Katrina, Days of Terror, Months of Anguish. That was the one artist show at the New Orleans Museum of Art. And of course, he did his own biography, his autobiography called Rolland Golden, Life, Love, Art in the French Quarter. And more than a biography, it was more of a sort of a very long love letter to his wife, Stella. And so it was a very touching book.
Who's been such a part of his life?
Oh, you know, she is a master at business and how to help an artist move forward in their career. In fact, she even gave workshops in the past on helping artists sell their work and promote their work. And Rolland was very fortunate to have
her daughter Lucille,
and then
too.
Lucille now working with Stella. But yeah, he had a great team working with
Sure did.
between Lucille and
Sure
Stella.
does.
But you know, he's gone now, but he has left us a tremendous legacy through his art. Yeah, great guy.
I loved his autobiography. And
Did you read it?
It was such an intimate look at him and at the French Quarter and at New Orleans in a certain time period. It was people who love New Orleans will love that book.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
absolutely.
right, John, thank you.
Thank you.
And now it's time for our picks. Poppy?
Well, you know, they say to start off the new year right with breakfast, and I'm telling you, if you have not been, go to the Acorn Cafe in the new Children's Museum in City Park. I was there for breakfast recently. You can't beat the views.
No.
And there was a pelican who was breakfasting just adjacent to the cafe and the water right there. It's really great.
Oh, John?
Okay, we'll have two shows. Well, Saturday night, the opening's on Julia Street and also along Magazine Street. And there's one show that I mentioned. It's at the, Magazine first. It's at the Cal Robinson Gallery, Jerry Allen, Curtis Johnson, and a number of other artists. And also on Julia Street, Jim Richard, the well-known New Orleans artist at the Arthur Roger Gallery. And you have one for us, too.
I wanted to mention my cousin Alan Gerson is going to have an opening on Saturday night starting at Lemieux Gallery.
Right.
And I know, just look it up, Lemieux Gallery, Lemieux.
Oh, yes, well, he's been at Lemieux for years, so folks know that.
That's
on
right.
Julia,
Right.
of course.
He does
very
good work, too.
And before we go to my picks, wait, did you want your pick? I'm sorry.
One last thing I want to mention. A couple weeks ago, I mentioned about Liz Calloway coming down with Seth Rudetsky, but I wanted to mention the local connection. Brian Batt's going to be performing with her, and of course, a great local performer, but also known on the Broadway stage. So he's going to be here Saturday the 11th at 8 o'clock at NOCA. And again, that is a series going to be ending, but hopefully we'll know what the new series will be for this year. There are several other big Broadway performers that Mark Cartelli Productions has been bringing to Provincetown and other places, including Kelly O'Hara and other people like that, Jesse Mueller. We hope that they'll be coming down to New Orleans, too.
Do you realize how lucky, well, I know you realize how fortunate we are. If you're interested in Broadway quality cabaret, yeah,
Sure.
Definitely. Thank you.
I mean, they had Beth Level, they had Arthur McDonald, and now they're going to have Liz Calloway. I mean, wonderful. Yeah.
Anyway, thank you.
All right.
And before we go to my picks, I wanted to show you a few photos from the recent International Creche exhibit held at St. Alphonsus Art and Cultural Center, right there on Constance Street. And here's board president Blanche Comiskey, this amazing woman. There were 168 creches on view. To support and to learn more about the Friends of St. Alphonsus, so important, that building, visit friendsofstalphonsus.org in the heart of the Irish Channel. Look how, isn't that dear? And look at Peanuts. There's even a Peanuts rash. Anyway, yes, friendsofstalphonsus.org. And some more picks. MS Rao Antiques is offering free self-guided tours throughout their newly renovated. It's gorgeous. I went to see it. Focusing on historical items from the 18 and 1920s. And here we have pictures of two items on display: an Art Deco, almost 17-carat emerald bracelet, and we have a Bavarian pharmacy balance. The free tours run through next Friday, January 10th, at their location at 630 Royal. It's as if you're going to the museum, okay? Visit RaoAntiques.com to learn more. Also, check out, by the way, their Impressionist paintings, including a Renoir. You know, it's amazing. The Michi Group, Friends of the Metropolitan Opera National Council, is holding their district and regional auditions this weekend at Loyola University's Roussel Performance Hall. District auditions are free and open to the public, and you can be in the audience. And they take place tomorrow, starting at 9 a.m. The regional auditions take place on Sunday, starting at 1 p.m., and the cost there is just $10 per person. The winner on Sunday will go to New York to compete with other regional finalists. AmiciMonc.org. This group raises money to help cover the New York travel expenses for the local winners. The 12th annual Joan of Arc Parade rolls this Monday, January 6th, starting at 7 p.m. And at 6:45, there's going to be a city proclamation read at the corner of Bienville and North Front. And the parade rolls past the Joan of Arc statue and pauses there to sing Happy Birthday. The crowning of the King and Queen. There's a ceremony with king cakes taking place at the end of the route at Washington Artillery Park. Visit joanavarcparade.org for details. And by the way, they're giving out handmade throws. Let me show you this cute little ornament style handmade throw. And of course, 12th night, we know the Funny 40 Fellows, PPP, will of course once again herald the arrival of Carnival with their annual streetcar ride. The PPP will assemble at 6:30 p.m. at the Willow Streetcar Barn and will of course board the streetcar and ride down the St. Charles Avenue line starting at 7 p.m. Visit funny40fellows.com to learn more. Come out and see all the fellows in their costumes. It's really fun just to hang around the streetcar. And there's some very special handouts there too. A little bracelet. There's even a lens cleaner. There are magnets, courtesy of the captain, all kinds of good things too. Thank you all so very much. And thank you very much for watching. Good night.
This program is sponsored in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support the arts and culture in the greater New Orleans area. Support for Steppin Out comes in part from the Christovich family in honor of Mary Lou and Bill Christovich.